Hi everyone, welcome to Tech Tuesday. My name is Tom Levine, I'm Cornerstone's tech guru, and today, as you can see, we're going to be talking about how internet ads find you and advertisements online. Before we get moving, just a few things to make note of. First, some general housekeeping. If you have a question throughout the presentation, please don't hesitate to type it into that question box there. We'll answer questions at the end of the presentation, but I'll also try to get to relevant questions as we're covering different topics. So don't hesitate to pop one in the question box. Additionally, if you have some questions or have any other technical questions that might not be relevant to this presentation, please feel free to reach out to me directly as well. My phone number is displayed on the screen as well as my email, and we're going to be displaying the slide at the end of the presentation as well. Also, don't forget to check out Cornerstone's COVID-19 resource pages. Our resource center is a fresh new face with document search function, and we'll keep you up to date on important news regarding this COVID stuff going on. If you're interested, all of our webinars are also posted to the Resource Center, as well as Cornerstone's white papers and other additional services as well. I am putting a link to our Resource Center in the chat box now. So if you're interested, don't hesitate to click on that. Also, Autopilot. Autopilot is Cornerstone's compensation-based client referral program. It offers the services of our licensed representatives to help service clients in areas that you might not be familiar with or might not have expertise in. We cover not only individual insurance, but also group and Medicare solutions as well as family coverage. So that way you get to offer your clients the best service, even in areas that you might not specialize in, and keep them close to you as well. Putting a link in the chat as well to that if you're curious. So just to prime your brain to start thinking about all the different ways that people can get information on you online, I have a few rhetorical questions here. The first being, how many accounts do you have online? This doesn't just refer to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, although those are valid options for this, but it also means maybe you have a personal website that you created a while ago. Maybe you have an old MySpace page you haven't deleted. Maybe you have a personal website that you created a very long time ago and have information there that isn't fully deleted off of the internet. It's also possible you had an old blog maybe. These are the kinds of things I'm talking about when you're thinking about different accounts online. Also, it could be maybe you have an Amazon account. Maybe you have an account with Macy's. So this kind of stuff also counts there as well. Another thing you might want to think about is what kind of information you willingly post online. This more pertains to your social media, but also to your business information as well. Do you have your business information and your personal contact information listed separately? Do you just have your personal phone number that you use for your business? If you kind of mingle those two bits of information, if anyone were to just Google your phone number or Google maybe your personal email address that you also use for business, they could also pull up your personal social media. So these are the kinds of things you might want to think about as well when you talk about online presence. And lastly, kind of along the same vein, is how are your web accounts linked together? Meaning, how exactly are you, linking your accounts? You could maybe have it set up to log into Facebook with your Google email address, or log into a bunch of other services just using Facebook. These kinds of things create links between your Facebook account and the other account that you're creating, so it makes it much easier for people like Facebook to track your online activity. So these are things you might want to consider. Now, I will say before I move on to the main body, how do advertisers target you? Have you ever attended one of our webinars? If so, just to use it as an example, we get contact lists that we get from all of these webinars. These include, email addresses, and that's about it. But a lot of other things like full-on seminars, conventions, sales meetings, any other real interaction you have with a company gets recorded if you sign, personal information to a list, and that's used for advertising purposes. The same thing is true online. So if you ever obtain things like that, be wary of who you're giving it out to. Other companies aren't as kind with your information as we are, and if you give them permission, even unwittingly, they can sell that information to other third-party advertisement agencies. A lot of the power from these sorts of lists and creation methods are how they get cross-referenced. So think about how data points can be used in creative ways and other different methods that can be used to sort of create all your different touch points lining together, because that's how advertisers get very specific in what they do. Before I move on to the next slide, I will say a lot of these methods could be construed as very invasive. So before we really get into it, don't get frightened. A lot of this stuff is being used in very narrow ways, but some of the possibilities how they can be used can be construed as being incredibly invasive. So don't worry too much when I say microphone logging, aka wiretaps. This is one of the more sensational methods that's being used by advertisers today. So people tend to freak out about it, at least in my mind, a little unnecessarily. While your phone company, Google, and Facebook might not be listening to your conversations, your phone still might be at least listening for keywords. While a lot of bigger tech companies deny any bugging of your device, it can still happen. Third-party apps, especially ones that you install on your cell phone, often have permissions to make the app function. These are things like access to your camera, access to your photo library, access to your contacts, and other sorts of things. Specifically, contact with your microphone is one of the things they have to prompt for. A lot of these companies can use this to track individual keywords, things like bar or Cincinnati Reds, and use that as a data point on you. A lot of the bigger tech companies shy away from this, or if they do it, they keep that information private, but it's why you really want to look at the third-party apps you install. It's part of why maybe if you're using a third-party texting app to send an email or a message to a bunch of your contacts and ask, hey, what are we doing Saturday night? You shouldn't be surprised if you see a bunch of ads for bars. Another thing that you might think is, oh, well, maybe it's not recording when my microphone's turned off. But the real question I'd ask you there is, when is your microphone turned off? With a lot of things like the Amazon Alexa, you have to think, how do they know that you're saying those keywords to get them to listen in? If your Alexa hears the word Alexa, it boots up and starts questioning what you're doing. But how does it hear you say Alexa? That's because the microphone's always on. It's just something to think about, really. A lot of organizations, like I said, just use it to listen to keywords and try to get data points on you. Excuse me. That way, they don't go for full recordings of your conversations, and they're not trying to actually monitor everything you're doing. They're just listening for information that they can use to create, advertisement dots. So just something to be aware of. If you're concerned about this, I'd say you might want to think about how many microphones you really own. We've already mentioned your cell phone, we've mentioned Alexa and the Google Dot, but if you've got a webcam, most webcams have microphones installed in them now. So if it's plugged into your computer or your phone and you are using an app that allows access to a microphone, it's probably using that too. Same thing with a headset or any other sort of device that has mic control features. Now, a lot of apps that use this do have to give you a disclaimer and request access to different parts. One of the things I'd recommend is, actually looking at the things that your app's requesting when you install it. If you install a calculator and it's trying to get access to your camera, I'd be a little concerned about that. So just, read a little bit more into things if you're a little concerned. The next most sensational method used is location tracking. This can be used in a broad and targeted sense. So we're going to start with the targeted methods. These are ads that target you based on your travel habits or your current location. They can be used to target ads for online on the web or pop-up notifications used by media. YouTube often tries to target things that are area related based on where you are. It can also limit ads you see to more relevant ones. So it's, in my mind, kind of a double-edged sword. But if you think that just turning off your location settings are enough to block this, targeted location advertisement, you'd sadly be mistaken. One of the things that we covered in a previous Tech Tuesday and that we've talked about before, even with Jeff from Connective Computing, is how the internet works in general. When your phone talks to a server, that server, sends information all over the world to where the website is. And the information being relayed to that website from your phone includes your location tracking data. So it might not know exactly where you are if you turn off your location settings, but it can generally tell you're in like the Cincinnati area, for example. So that's generally, general enough in order to target ads. So if you think that just turning off your GPS is going to stop this kind of thing, it's not. And that's just with specific location targeting. They also can use your travel habits if you have permissions turned on, and they're turned on by default, by the way, to generally create kind of a map of where you go and create generally an idea of what kind of areas of towns you hang out in. This can be used to help target different advertisements as well. I'm going to link a few things in the chat just in case you're interested in reading up on this more specifically and how companies can use your information directly. Specifically, I'm going to link the Google Support Ads link there first. This tells you how Google uses its area tracking to target advertisements. So if you're interested in more of a deep dive into this, I'd recommend reading that. Basically, though, summarized, location settings are applied to area-based advertisements in a broad sense. So like I mentioned before, if you think turning off location tracking while you're not using it will stop them, it doesn't stop data they've already mined from being used to create a map. If you're interested in really making sure that your location presences are completely wiped from Google and completely wiped from everything else, I'm going to post a link there in a second. But basically, using this sort of tracking, they can determine, oh, this person is not only in the Cincinnati area now, they hang out around there often. Maybe I should show them more ads for specifically this area. They could also say, oh, this person flies back and forth often from Ohio to California. Maybe I should show advertisements for California companies as well as Ohio companies and things like that. If you have all of your location settings turned on and you natively opt in, advertisers are tracking exactly where you're going and exactly how that is being used. If you're interested in fully opting out of this, this would be canceling all data that they've got on you completely. This article that I just put in the chat also discusses how you can do that. That being said, this information isn't really displayed publicly, and it's important to note that when you combine these things together, being the location tracking and the mic bugging, it allows people to get very specific. Let's say you, for example, are a big fan of coffee, and you're talking about different local coffee shops all the time, and Google knows that, well, you hang out in the Cincinnati area, you might get targeted for ads for very local coffee shops. And now this can save advertisers money and you relevance, but if you feel that that's a bit invasive, it kind of can be. So like I said, thinking creatively, thinking about how these methods can be used together, that's really where the power comes. Another thing that companies can do if you have online accounts with them is use your search history to create advertisement content and target you. Google and Amazon are really big tech giants who use this often. And that's part of why Jeff mentioned in his foray into our webinar that Google is a tech giant and you should be wary of what they're doing. Companies tend to do this by not just logging you through your personal accounts, but also through cookies. And that's another buzzword used by popular media, so I feel it's necessary to dive into it a little bit more. All cookies are small little text files that ID you and your computer to web pages. These also are used to save your preferences and setups on web pages, and there are little bits of information that are saved locally to your device or to your web browser that allow these websites to give you some basic web functionality, things like saving your password, things like saving your personal settings on a Facebook page, or things like back in the day of MySpace, saving all of the different customizations you had applied. If you're managing a web page, these things can also be used to save your preferences for how you have your SEO layouts, or how you have different preferences applied. So they're not all bad, and they were originally developed for good intent, but cookies can also be used to track you for advertisement data. A company can say, pull up the cookies stored on your device for all the web pages you have accessed. When you go to their page and see, okay, this person's maybe accessing a bunch of technology web pages, and so maybe we should show them advertisement content specifically relating to computing. So that's one thing to be aware of. Also, if you're using something like Google, they are logging your search activity too, and not just using cookies. We actually have a question specifically saying, would this explain why I'm now getting ads on my Facebook newsfeed and on my cell phone for the same website used after my son purchased an engagement ring? If you share Wi-Fi at home, different usernames, passwords, and accounts, I'd say probably. Depending on where your son bought the engagement ring, it's possible that the Facebook sees, oh, I've logged this person searching for engagement rings, so maybe I should show them a bunch of other advertisements on this device related to engagement rings. That's very possible. Obviously, there are a lot of different touch points that could be used, and if your son and you are in the same location using similar device IDs from similar Wi-Fi connections, then yeah, it's entirely possible that you're getting a bunch of engagement ring advertisements as well. So yeah, I'd say it's 100% possible. Also, here's the real catch. It's not just cookies that advertisers can use to target these advertisements. They already have the server logs and your IP address from your device. So if you, for example, are using a home computer to access all of this content, and you create an account on a website, then they see your activity for what you're browsing on that website anyway. So, they don't necessarily even need the cookie. If they're doing due diligence, they have all the information of what you've been looking at on their website anyway. So just removing cookies doesn't really help, in my opinion, but something to be aware of. Also, online activity monitoring. This is a little bit different from search history advertisement as well, because it is logged by web browsers and web pages. So for example, why we shy away from Google Chrome and recommend Firefox is that, Google already has so many touch points on you. If you're using Google Chrome, not only do they have access to your full list of search history that you use from Google, they also have access to everything you type in their search bar, every single website you visit. Every single thing that you do online will then be monitored by Google. So not only do they have your search information, not only do they have your email account if you have a Gmail account, not only do they have all of the web pages that you've saved and linked to Google, they also now have everything you do online through their web browser. Web browsers, ISPs, all have different levels to access to this kind of information. Your ISP already has access to all the web browsing that you do within their network. So that means your home Wi-Fi, if you have Time Warner or Cincinnati Bell, anything you type into there is being logged by your ISP. So anything you access through your ISP is logged there, and they have that data. Most ISPs do not sell this information, but if they have something in their contract that says they're allowed to, they can sell your information directly to advertisers, and that's something to be aware of. Also, web browsers, like we already mentioned, like Google, they're already offering advertisement services and not really necessarily giving out your information through that to other people, but they are using that to build up their portfolio and target their ads more specifically. So it's something to be aware of, how your activity is being monitored. It's also part of the reason why VPNs have become so popular, at least in private use. People who are scrupulous about their activity being monitored by their ISP would want to use a VPN, because if you're using one, then all your ISP sees is that you are talking specifically to the VPN. The VPN is then the one who's making all these queries and doing all the searching and doing all the online browsing for you. So all your ISP sees is, oh, this person is talking to a VPN, not seeing, hey, this person is going to Netflix, this person is going to Google, this person is going to all these hosts of different social media sites or private sites. So that's part of why VPNs have become so popular. Personally, I think things are already getting to the point where they can get so many touch points on you, it doesn't matter. But, you know, if you're trying to stay fully anonymous online, that's why VPNs are, really becoming popular. So be careful about where you're using and browsing online. In our previous tech talk about, different private browsers and different ways to stay private online, that's also one of the reasons why it would be useful. The last one I think scares people a lot more than it should as well, but there is purchase history monitoring. Like we mentioned before, because I like to pick on Google, have you used Google Wallet or any other online platform like PayPal to pay online? Well, maybe they have not only your information that you used to pay, but also your purchase history through that platform. This can be used to target your behavior more specifically as well, and it's something that Amazon uses. I don't go on Amazon often, but when I do, it tends to be to buy tiny little doodads and knickknacks for my tech stuff at home. For example, I built a computer 3 months ago, and when I did, I had to buy a specific cable. And when I typed that into Amazon just once, I logged off, found the one I was looking for elsewhere, and went and bought it. But for the next, 5 months, it's been 3 months, but basically ever since, I've been getting a whole bunch of ads for that specific cable that I looked for. And it's because I searched once for it. So, a bunch of different web pages that are very big online stores use purchase history. A bunch of third-party apps like Google Wallet can use this to show, specific products that you're buying using their service and say, okay, well, this person's buying a bunch of things related to X. Maybe I should show them a bunch of ads related to X. So let's take a more broad scope of this and think, if they're already monitoring where you're going, they're already monitoring, what you're searching online, they're already monitoring what you're buying, and they have all of this information from all of your old online accounts that you've accessed and created before, and they've mined out that data, that's a very, very specific targeted profile that they've got then that they can use to show you very specific advertisement information. So it's not surprising that we see a bunch of ads online today that target very specifically our interests. It can almost feel uncanny sometimes if you mention, you're going to a pub downtown and you start getting a bunch of ads for pubs. Oh, that's very strange. Maybe it's fully listening into my conversation. Maybe, but they may also just have you figured out to a T based on your travel settings. It's a Friday, they're probably going downtown to a pub, things like that. And with purchase history monitoring, maybe they could also see, oh, this person goes out to bars a lot. Maybe I should show them that. Maybe they see that you're like me and a huge tech head, and they want to target technology to you. So with all these different touch points, it's not surprising that advertisers get very specific in their advertising content. So now you might be thinking, well, this doesn't affect me. I use Incognito Mode, and Incognito Mode will help me stay private online. And spoiler alert, it won't. I have this disclaimer used by Firefox private browsing feature just to sort of dissect it for you a bit. So what does private browsing do? It's very clear. It does not save the web pages that you visit. It does not save the cookies and prompts sites to not save cookies. It does not save the searches that you make, and does not make temporary files that you download or have access to. Sorry, what I mean there is it doesn't create temporary files without request. It will save, however, your bookmarks and your downloads. Here's the key here. It does not save cookies, but if you have cookies already installed on your device from previous non-private browsing sessions, those cookies will still work. If you sign into a web page, that web page still has all the information that you've accessed their server. You might not be, saving your search history to your web browser, but if you Google something, Google already has a request that, your IP address has queried this thing. And if they already, know that your individual account on their server is linked to this IP address, they can add that touch point in anyway. So private browsing doesn't necessarily mean you're actually browsing privately. It just means your web browser isn't saving that history. That's why they have the disclaimer there below that information saying private browsing does not make you anonymous on the internet. Also, your ISP still tracks everything you do through them. So it's really not private at all. The tracking protection thing is nice that they have it turned on, but all that does is your web browser makes a request to the website saying, hey, please don't track what I do. It's up to the website whether or not they respect that, and they can choose to ignore it. So that's something that you should be aware of, in my opinion. The bottom line is, if you're already being tracked, private browsing won't stop you from being tracked. And if you're concerned about staying private online, private browsing doesn't help. So just something to be aware of. Now, after all of this, you're probably rightly a little worried about your online presence and what you can do to get all this information off of the internet. And I do have a few recommendations for you. Even if you haven't been, so private in the past, you can still help limit this data exposure. The first thing you can do is turning off your location tracking when you're not using it. Now, we've already discussed that this isn't a foolproof solution, but it does prevent future, logging of your specific location when you're not using your data. So turning off that might not be a real full way to limit exposure, but I mean, it's a start. You can turn it off through your phone, and you can also request to delete that information online through the link that I've previously provided. Additionally, you should review your assistance data. This would be your Siri, your Alexa, your Google, all of those. And I will actually link in the chat there in a second all of the links to how to delete your search history through those things. You can request it. A lot of other sites request that you send in a letter or an email to delete that sort of information if you're using them third party. But if you're not using Siri, Google, Alexa, just find it online. You can do a general search for how to delete my data, and then you'll be able to find it real easy. Also, limit your number of online accounts and make sure access to old web pages are fully deleted. This is something that I'd recommend to anyone. Also, don't link your accounts together. So, logging into everything with Facebook might be easy, but if you want to limit the amount of information they have on you, maybe don't link everything to your Facebook account. Also, consider opting out of ads. There are already third-party little add-ons to a bunch of different web pages or web browsers that you can install that block all advertising content. So it doesn't necessarily block, them tracking your information, but it does block those ads from showing up if you consider it a real nuisance. Things like ad block are very useful, and a lot of apps installed on a lot of browsers can do that. So I'd recommend checking a few out. Also, if you're worried about the tech giants and all the information they have on you, maybe use a different search provider or a different, web browsing service. I highly recommend DuckDuckGo as a alternative, non-logging search engine option. And we've already covered a bunch of other options in previous Tech Tuesdays for different web browsers you can use to stay private. Additionally, and this is the biggest thing you can do, in my opinion, review all app permissions when you install them. There's something called a term of service, and a lot of people don't read that in full. Normally, it's a bunch of legal jargon containing how class actions go, how different ways that the company is limiting their liability, but also buried in there is how that company can use your device's different features to incorporate into its app. Based on actually a decision of Congress that I'm not really sure of what exactly it's called. It's been a while since I've reviewed that law, but basically whenever an app gets installed on your device, it has to request specific permissions from you to access your microphone, access your location settings, access all of that. That's why the first time you open up Google Maps, it asks to turn on and gain access to your location. And all apps do this. Like I mentioned before, really think about what information you're providing to your apps to make sure that your information isn't being logged without your consent. If you download a calculator and it's trying to access your location in your camera, maybe don't give it access to your location in your camera and try to find a different app. Real quick, the first link that I'm putting in there is to a PC Mag article for how to delete your Alexa history. The next one that I'm putting in is how to delete your Google Assistant history. And this very last one that I'm putting in here is how to delete your Apple history. All those three are the last three links that I've shared in the chat there. And if you're really interested in digging deep into some of this stuff, I also have my full resource page that I'm displaying now. These are all of the different things that I found excessively useful when researching all of this stuff. So if you have any interest in reviewing all of my sources, please reach directly out to me and I will send you all these links and all of these slides as well. Just credit where credit is due. Wonderful articles. So that being said, if you have any questions about how advertisers are monitoring you and how to stay a little bit more private online, please feel free to give me a call or email or ask me any questions now. I know that this stuff isn't maybe the most interesting, but it is important to stay private online and make sure you're limiting all of the information out there. One of the things we didn't really discuss earlier is even though all the advertisers have all this data, they tend to keep it private. They tend to not really share it. But what happens if a hacker gets into those databases? Then not only do they have all of those touch points on you, but they also have all of that personal information they've collected and your habits, which can be sold as well. So even though it's something that a lot of people don't really use maliciously, and I'm not excessively concerned about myself, it is still kind of a security risk. So it's something to be aware of. Like I said, though, any questions, feel free to contact me. Some of our upcoming webinars you might be interested in. Tomorrow there is a special presentation given by Jeff Baglin and our special guest Dennis Haywood about bundling Social Security. So if you're interested in getting into that, I'd highly recommend attending that webinar at 9:30 tomorrow. Also, Jess Larkin and Corey Paff of WebTech are coming back next week doing website FAQs and other questions that you might have about website creation. So if you have any questions about how to expand your online presence on, make your website a little bit more professional, or how to incorporate maybe a unique bit of coding, that's something that you might want to ask them then. So stay tuned to upcoming events, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'm going to stay online a little bit longer just to answer any other questions.